It was 2014, and I had just entered my senior year of high school, preparing for prom. Like most teenage girls, I wanted to look perfect for that night. The problem was, prom dresses weren't cheap. My parents set a budget of $200, but I knew that dresses at boutiques usually cost much more than that. My mom suggested that I look for a second-hand dress online. We started searching through various marketplaces and local buy and sell forums. After some time, we found a dress that caught our attention. A dark blue evening gown. It looked elegant in the photo and was only $70. The description stated that it had only been worn once for a previous prom and was still in excellent condition. The seller lived in Tacoma, Washington, about 30 minutes from where I lived. I immediately contacted the number listed in the ad. It didn't take long for me to receive a response from someone who introduced himself as Thomas. After asking about the size and condition of the dress, he offered to deliver it to my house. But my mom, who was always cautious about strangers, refused. She suggested that we pick it up at an agreed-upon location instead. Thomas gave me his home address, located in an old residential area on the outskirts of Tacoma. It wasn't a rundown or sketchy neighborhood, but it looked somewhat worn out and not very busy. We arrived at around 4 p.m. His house was an old cottage-style building, standing slightly apart from the others. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and there were no cars parked out front. As I stepped out of the car, my mom asked if I wanted her to come with me, but I thought it wasn't necessary. I didn't want to seem like a little kid who needed supervision, so I told her to wait in the car, and that I'd text her if I needed anything. I walked up to the front door and knocked. The house was shut tight, with all the curtains drawn even though it was still bright outside. I started to feel a little uneasy but tried to stay calm. The door opened, and instead of a girl my age, a middle-aged man, probably around 50, stood there. He gave me a thin smile and asked if I was here for the dress. I nodded and asked, "Are you Thomas?" He replied, "Yes, that's me." I started feeling uneasy. I wasn't sure why, but something about his smile and the way he looked at me felt off. He then commented that my body size would be perfect for the dress and invited me inside while he went to get it. I hesitantly stepped inside. The house felt stuffy, with a strong scent of dust. The living room was dimly lit, with only a sliver of sunlight filtering through the curtains. I stood near the door, looking around. The room was messy. Some open cardboard boxes were scattered on the floor and stacks of old magazines piled in the corner. There were no signs that anyone else lived there. I started feeling uncomfortable. Time passed, but I didn't hear Thomas walking back. I took out my phone and texted my mom, asking her to come to the door. Suddenly, I heard Thomas's voice from the other room. "Come in here. There's a mirror, so you can try it on." I refused and asked him to bring the dress out instead, but he insisted, saying it was better for me to see it inside the room. My gut feeling grew worse. I took a step back toward the door. Just then, there was a loud knock at the front door. Thomas looked startled and immediately asked in a tense voice, "Who is it?" I quickly opened the door, and there stood my mom. She smiled politely and greeted Thomas, but the man seemed stiff before finally responding in a flat tone. I pretended not to notice the shift in his expression and glanced toward the doorway of the darkened room. The room was dark, and there was no dress laid out on the bed like he had said. I immediately sensed something was very wrong. Keeping my voice calm but firm, I said, "The dress isn't here." The atmosphere suddenly became incredibly tense. Thomas stared at us for a few seconds before saying in a cold tone, "You two should leave now." My mom and I wasted no time. We walked out, got into the car, and drove away. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Thomas peeking through the slightly opened curtain. We were both still shaken by what had just happened. If my mom hadn't shown up at the door, I don't know what could have happened. We reported the ad, but since technically no crime had occurred, there wasn't much we could do. One thing was clear. There was never a blue dress in that house. He just wanted me to step further inside, and when my mom arrived, his plan failed. Since that day, I have never met up with an online seller without ensuring the location was completely safe. Even now, that experience still haunts me. I always look forward to prom every year, not because I enjoy dancing or dressing up, but because it's the best time to spend with my friends before graduation. This year, I decided to attend the event at a new venue, a hall being used for our school's prom for the first time. It was a large building on the outskirts of town, about an hour away from my home. From the moment I arrived, the place didn't feel as glamorous as I had imagined. The lights were dim, some areas felt damp, and there was a faint musty smell in the air. Still, I tried to enjoy the atmosphere, chatting with my friends and waiting for the main event to begin. About an hour into the night, I felt the need for some fresh air. I stepped out of the main hall and wandered down a quiet hallway leading to the back of the building. At the end of the hall, I saw something strange. It was a prom dress, old and dirty, hanging from a rusted metal rack near the emergency exit. Even from a distance, I could see that the fabric was torn in several places, as if it had been untouched for years. There was no one else around, so I stepped closer for a better look. The dress looked like it belonged to someone from a past era, maybe decades ago, but what sent chills down my spine was how it remained hanging there, as if someone had deliberately placed it. I glanced around, searching for any other clues, but there was nothing. After a few minutes, I decided to head back inside. I couldn't stop thinking about the dress, but I couldn't come up with a logical reason why it would be there. As I returned to the party, I started noticing something else. Small items scattered on the floor and in the corners of the hall. A single high heel, a dusty corset, a small purse left open with its contents missing. It was as if someone had abandoned everything on purpose. The longer I stayed, the more uneasy I felt. Who had left all of this behind? This wasn't an accident, and I was certain that all these items belonged to the same person. As the clock neared midnight, I decided to leave early. I said goodbye to a few friends and walked to the back parking lot to get my car. By then, the outside was much quieter, with only a few people smoking in the corner. I opened my car door and was about to get in when I felt something strange. I turned my head. On the other side of the lot, someone was standing there. A tall, thin man in a worn-out black suit. His face was pale, his eyes hollow as he stared straight at me. I froze. At that moment, I was so shocked and terrified that everything felt unreal. "Leave," he said in a low voice. His tone was so deep and cold that it made my skin crawl. I nodded and quickly got into my car, but before I could shut the door, the man moved, fast. I stumbled back into the driver's seat, and the only thing I could say was, "Okay," over and over. He stood right outside my car, his empty stare never breaking. "Leave," he repeated. I knew this time I couldn't hesitate. I started the car and sped out of the parking lot. As I glanced at my rearview mirror one last time, he was still standing there, and right behind him, the old prom dress was now lying on the ground, as if it had just fallen from something. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main road, where I finally felt safe enough to breathe again. A few days later, I tried to find out more about the building. I came across an old article from years ago about a girl who disappeared after prom. The dress she wore was exactly the same as the one I had seen that night. But what haunted me the most was, why didn't the man do anything to me? He just stood there, telling me to leave, leaving all those scattered belongings behind, as if waiting for someone to find them.